tonight we're jumping back to the story of David. So we've spent a few weeks talking about sex. And of course tonight, masturbation. Don't say it too loud because it's weird. So we're jumping back to the story of David and tying in with the game that we played tonight, which is one of my favorites because I am pretty competitive with it. We're talking about integrity, right? So as you were playing that game, how did you react? Were you like I can be sometimes where you're snatching that pen right away, ready to write the next number, or maybe you throw that pen a little bit to the side or all the way to the corner so the next person can't quite get it, or you roll the dice, it's not your number, you whack it to the side. Sometimes that may be how I play, right? So how would you define integrity? What is your personal definition of integrity? Doing the right thing when no one's watching. That's good. I think I heard the same thing from the fuel, so you guys must hear that message quite a bit. So the dictionary.com definition of integrity is adherence to moral and ethical principles, soundness of moral character, and honesty. So what we're going to talk about tonight is recapping where we're at with David and how he responds through his journey with integrity. So going back to touch on some of the points that we've talked through before, we've talked about David slaying Goliath, when David was anointed by Samuel to be king at 15 years old. And I wanted to give a visual of what I think of when I think of David at that time, at that age. So when he was slaying Goliath, or he was anointed king at 15, this is what I think of. That's the VeggieTales version of David, when it's David versus Goliath. That story, that's what I think of when I think of David at 15. The young David, kind of a little guy, trying real hard. That's what I think of. And then as we carry on further in the story of David, and we think about David running from Saul, and this picture may not be totally applicable, but when I think of David on the run from Saul, this is what I think of. I don't know if you guys remember Swiper the Fox, right? Because David's not necessarily swiping, right? But he is kind of sneaking off in the night, right? Staying away from Saul. That's what I think of. I know, it's kind of weird, but that's just me. And then we fast forward to when David takes the throne at age 30. David as a king, this is what I think of. Maybe. Right now. There it is, right? The statue of David, appropriately cut off just in the right position so we don't get weird in here. That's what I think of, right? This strapping man who goes from the little vegetable to this as a king, right? So that's what I think of. Call me weird, but anyway, that's how I think. So in previous lessons, we learned how Saul died, right? So tonight we're talking about David, his ascension to the throne, and kind of the integrity that he had throughout, as I mentioned, throughout that journey. The different experiences in his life, opportunities where he could have acted in so many different ways, but in the end, he always acted with integrity, right? So if we take the example, for instance, of when Saul and Jonathan die, right? First, how did David react to that? So if we flip to 2 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 12, if everybody has their Bible, go ahead and flip to that. We'll read through that real quick. So once you're there, go ahead and give me a thumbs up or something. Let me know that you guys are good. Looks like we don't do Bibles in high school or what? 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 12. See a lot of blank faces, so that's great. Good. Dan, thumbs up. Great. There's one of us. Good. Jen. All the leaders. I appreciate. Yes. Autumn. Thank you. Okay. So 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 12, it says, "They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword." So then we jump forward to 2 Samuel chapter 1, 17 and 18. It says, "David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow." So would you cry if your worst enemy or your nemesis died or something happened to them? They were hurt, or let's say they failed at something. Would you celebrate that, or would you weep? Think about that. So me being a sports fan, college basketball fan, it's March Madness, right? Super excited about the basketball tournament. And if you happen to be a KU fan, and you're watching the Missouri Tigers, for instance, in the first round, are you cheering them on as a KU fan? Probably not, right? You're pretty excited they went out in the first round. And then when you're watching K-State pulling off the biggest upset of the tournament so far when they beat the 16 seed UMBC, who had just made history, are you pulling for K-State to win as a KU fan? Or are you really hoping they lose to that 16 seed? So think about that. And here we have David in a moment where Saul's been trying to kill him, right? He's been chasing him around, trying to kill him. And now Saul's gone. He's dead. And what does David do? He weeps for that, right? In that moment, most people would be celebrating. They're finally free, right? That pursuit, Saul's coming after them, that he's finally free of that burden. But he doesn't celebrate. He weeps. He doesn't forget that once they were friends, that one time he served Saul, and that Jonathan once helped him escape Saul when he was trying to kill him, right? So he weeps for both of them. So on the key point number 1 in your notes, if you're trying to be a person of integrity, don't celebrate the failure of others, okay? If we're trying to be a person of integrity, maybe we shouldn't cheer for K-State to lose as a KU fan. All right, so now that Saul's gone, David's in line to be king, right? So what would you do, or what do you think David did first? Now that Saul's gone and he's becoming a king, what do you think he did first? I guess for you guys, if you were suddenly, you became a king or queen, what would be the first thing that you would do? What's that? Take a nap. Okay. All right. Yeah. Celebrate. Okay. What else? I think in the fuel we had taking care of the homeless. We had executing all the bad people in the world. Things like that. So you guys don't have anything like that? What about, like, would you deck out your castle with all the beautiful furniture or whatever, the crystal chandeliers, those type of things? I also put on here, what about the self-driving horse carriage? Right? So I think about if I came into some money, what would I want? I've always wanted a Tesla, but with all the bells and whistles. Like, not the base model, right? The one that is going to be the autonomous driving, the self-driving car, the one with all the cool electronics, right? The one that goes 0 to 60 in like no time at all, right? That's what I would want. So David became king, could really probably do whatever he wants. But let's look into 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1 to see what he did. So starting in verse 1, it says, "In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, 'Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?' he asked. The Lord said, "Go up." And David asked, "Where shall I go?" "To Hebron," the Lord answered. So here we see the first thing when David is anointed king, once Saul is gone, he goes to God, right? He doesn't immediately have this power trip where he's seeking to take over the whole world. He turns to God first for that guidance. And so after David becomes king, he doesn't take over all of the tribes of Israel. There's still some tension, right? There's a son of Saul that's still around and a commander of Saul's army, Abner, who says that son should be the king of many of the tribes, right? So David becomes king of the tribe of Judah at that time. And so there's an interesting story of the first battle of these tribes. So if you flip to 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 14, it says, "Then Abner said to Joab," and he was the commander of David's army, he said, "Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us." "All right, let them do it," Joab said. So they stood up and were counted off, 12 men for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and 12 for David. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together. So they had 12 on 12. Everybody dies. Not the best strategy, right? So that's how the battle started between David leading the tribe of Judah, and then Abner, the commander, leading Saul's son with the other tribes, right? So over time, David's army grew stronger and stronger. There was many more battles that happened. And over time, then Abner came over to David and basically submitted to the fact that David really should be king of all these tribes and that he should be the king of Israel. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 4, it says, "David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years." So David didn't force things on his own agenda or timing, right? He turned to God first, and through that, God set things up for him, right? And so maybe he didn't take over Israel right away and assert his power, but God set up his plan for him. So the key point number 2 in your notes is to seek God's guidance. All right, so now what about promises? Okay, people these days make a lot of promises, a lot of empty promises, right? There's no real intent to fulfill on that promise or follow through on it. And in the fuel, I gave the example, once again, going to college basketball. And if I made a promise to my son, Austin, to say that I would take him to a KU game at Wichita when they played in Wichita for the NCAA tournament, right? I'd spend a couple $100 probably on tickets. We'd probably be in the upper level somewhere. And all of a sudden I get a call from a friend that says, "You know what? I've got a ticket for the KU game. It's front row. You don't have to pay anything. I'll cover all your food and everything, and we'll sit courtside." Right? So I made a promise to Austin that I was going to take him to the game. But here, I have a friend that's going to take me, and I'm going to sit front row. So I can take Austin and sit in the nosebleeds, probably not have a real good view of the game, or I can go with my buddy. We can sit front row, all expenses paid. What should I do? What do you think you'd do in that situation? Honestly. So I would still pay for Austin to go, and then I go with my buddy and sit in the front row. I guess that's a fair compromise. But honestly, I mean, front row tickets, how often is that going to happen, right? So think about that. Think about if you're in that situation, maybe not specifically that, but think about a promise you've made to someone, but there's a better deal that comes along. Do you break that promise, or do you stick with it when you know there's maybe something better, right? So according to David, and in his life, you stick with that promise. Regardless of the circumstances you face, regardless of what's changed, you stick with your promise. And that's what David did. He honored his promises. So jumping backward to 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 12, it says, "Then Jonathan said to David, I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time, the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed toward you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely. If I do not let you know and send you away in peace, may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. So David kept his promise throughout the life of Saul and Jonathan, but also after they were gone. Okay, so there's an example. If we go to 2 Samuel verse 4, it talks about a son that Jonathan had, and that son had been injured and was considered lame, where he had severe damage to his legs and feet. And so that son at age 5 was considered lame. And so then we jump to 2 Samuel verse 9. It talks about how David brought him into his kingdom, into his royal family, took care of Jonathan's son, just like he promised back in 1 Samuel 20 that we just read. So his son, Mephibosheth, I always struggle with that, Mephibosheth, was brought into David's royal family and protected, right? Because he was a son out there who now just lost his father and was not within that royal family, and David brought him in and protected him. So key point number 3 in your notes is keep your promises, okay? Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't make empty promises. And make sure that if you do make a promise, that under any circumstances, you would stick to it. So no matter what changes, what the better deal is that comes along that you think might be better, whatever, you stick with your promise, okay? So really just thinking about how you can be a person of integrity in your life. So if you think about when you go to school tomorrow, assuming you guys are back in school, right? Spring break's over, right? Okay, good. Whew, finally. When you go to school, think about the challenges that you face throughout the day and how you'll handle those situations, right? There's going to be challenges. There's going to be people you don't like. How do you treat them, right? How do you treat your teachers? Do you act with integrity throughout your day, right? Even if it's at home with your family, how are you acting with your family? Are you acting with integrity? Okay, so for the next few minutes, I want you guys to break up into your groups with your leaders. I don't know how you guys normally break up, but get in somewhat small groups and talk about how can you be a person of integrity throughout your life, whether it's at school or at home. And share some of your experiences and how you responded and things that were successful for you, okay? So let's go ahead. All right, so just to reiterate, I guess the challenge for you guys is as you go back to your school and just in your life in general, making sure if you're a person of integrity that you're not celebrating the failure of others, that you turn to God first for guidance, right? Whether that's through prayer, whether that's getting into your Bible, whether that's seeking wise counsel, like in your groups, seeking a leader to help you through those tough decisions or those tough times in your life, right? So those are ways that you can seek guidance from God, is through other people, through prayer, through your Bible, okay? And then the last thing is just making sure if you're making promises, you're making promises that you can keep, okay? So I challenge you as you go back in your lives, you find ways to be a person of integrity.